Hello, everybody. My name is Ron Hadid. I'm with the Seven Foundation, and welcome to Storytelling with Michael Robinson Chavez. Seven Community in partnership with Photo Wings is very proud to bring you this continuing education series where once a month we discuss a relevant topic that should hopefully help you and us all get better with the photography and journalism that we're doing. I'd like to hand it over to the founder of Photo Wings, Susie Katz, to talk a little bit more about Seven Community with Photo Wings.
We're thrilled that you're here. Over a decade ago, I had this vision of bringing together cultures, disciplines, and generations. And that is all of you, the students from Foundry and the students from Seven Academy. And we wanted to bring you not only innovative programming, but also an interactive component. And you'll learn more about it on Zoom and Discord. And it's education to help you further develop your skills, but also your way of thinking across your work and your life so you can have long, healthy, and fulfilling careers. We'd encourage you to take a look at our brochure that you'll see a link for it, and also our archive where we have thousands of hours probably at this point of the leading voices and educators, curators. It's a really rich resource, and you'll see that the library on the Discord and also the website. We're thrilled you're here, and we're honored to have Michael with us.
So it really gives me great pleasure to introduce to you all, those of you that don't know, Michael Robinson Chavez, who is one of the great photographers working today, also a great colleague of mine. You see here a photograph of him when he was 15 years old. He's really matured into an amazing photographer. He's won the Pulitzer Prize a number of times. He's back at the Washington Post for a second stint. He's also been a staff photographer at the LA Times and worked elsewhere in the country. But Michael is one of the great storytellers of today, and we're really, really looking forward to learning more about his craft, the way that he approaches things, and hopefully a few tips that will help us all get just a little bit better. Michael, thank you so much for joining us, and I hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Ron. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen here, and it's really, really great to be here. And I want to thank Photo Wings and the Seven Community for having me. And can everybody see the screen sharing going on here? Can you guys see that?
Yes, we
All
can.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And I just really like that we're doing this continuing education series. I just think it's really great for everybody. And I don't know if there's any former Foundry students of mine out there, but if you are out there, it's great to see you again, as it were. I'm just going to dive right in here, and I'm going to be showing 3 different sets of photographs from throughout the years. The oldest one dates back to 2014. Which is a story I did about California drought. And I'm going to just share this on here, you guys. And I want to talk a little bit about, a lot of you are probably embarking on stories or have ideas for stories that you want to do. But the most important thing going into some of these is sort of, what is a topic that grabs you, right? What is something that is of interest to you? It's not necessarily the story du jour, as it were, but it's something that really calls to you. When I was living in California, returning to California, I'm from there originally. When I went back and worked at the Los Angeles Times after being on the East Coast for quite a number of years, drought was gripping the state of California. And it really reached a peak in 2014. So I pitched a story along with Diana Markham, our reporter in the Central Valley of California. And for those of you that know California, you know that the Central Valley is almost like another country in comparison to the rest of the state. And we really wanted to dive into this area and tell the story, not just about the drought's effects on the earth, but on the people. So we both kind of put our heads together to find out about different places and how are people being affected? What's going on with health? What's going on with access to running water? Farms, especially in this area where big agriculture can kind of just stomp out smaller farmers, and it had been going on for some time. And it was accelerated during the drought because they were just dropping their pipes deeper because they could afford to bore deeper wells, which was out of reach for most small farmers. So we really wanted to dive into that, and certainly the migrant labor that goes on in the Central Valley as it moves south to north, depending on the growing season, was also being really affected. A lot of Latinos that would normally be working in the Central Valley had pulled up stakes and had moved further north into the Northwest, into Washington, Yakima, into those valleys where the crops weren't suffering as mightily. This gentleman right here, Mr. White, he was at the mercy of his neighbor who had a much larger farm and could dig deeper. And so he was essentially tapping the water that's underneath his farm. His neighbor was tapping it, and he asked his neighbor if he could stop, and his neighbor said, I can't afford to. I can't afford to stop. So what Diana and I did is that we went from town to town. We discovered these characters. We ended up doing a series of stories, 5 stories throughout the year. And that's kind of how I crafted it story-wise. We would think about, okay, are we going to just do it geographically? Are we going to do it based on crops? And it worked out best kind of geographically. We'd zone in on one area because each town has its own unique history. Huron, which is a town you're looking at in this photograph here, is largely a migrant labor force. And then Terabella, this town here, is people who have lived there for many generations. The east side of the valley has older settlements. The west side of the valley is more big ag and conglomerates of that sort. So we decided to do that geographically. And I can't stress to you enough how important it is to really do your research, to know the area you're going in, especially on something like this that is very broad. It's a very broad topic. It's a series of chapters rather than just one news story or one particular feature story about one person or one family. This was about a much broader topic. But for me, the challenge was to kind of make it human, to put this human touch to the story. And there was a lot to cover. This is food giveaways going on. People were going without, so they were giving out packets of canned goods. And this is a lot of public money was going into this, but mainly it was a lot of private charities and NGOs that were doing this for people. So it was important too, when I was working on the story, I needed to stop at times, because when you're working in a story in parts, it's good to stop and assess where you are, right? What have you done to tell the story? Okay, I have a series of great pictures that I really like a lot, but when I put them together, are they indeed telling the story about what these people are going through? Or is it really working? Am I making that human contact? And you kind of realize, okay, that's graphically really interesting, or compositionally that seems to speak to drought, but I don't want the caked mud on the ground, or the dead animal that died of thirst, because we had seen those images before. We really wanted to get beyond that, both Diana in the written word and me visually. So I was able to kind of look and go back and get different types of scenes, push myself in ways that maybe the Los Angeles Times had never published pictures before, but also that I didn't take pictures like that before. But I wanted to get that sense of uneasiness, of dried out, of people, at the mercy of outside help that they normally would not have been. So I felt that, over the course of the year, we were very successful in doing that, but it was a lot of work to really think about how those pictures are going to play forward. And the research was definitely a big part of it. A lot of people ask me, well, how do you take pictures like this of people? How do you break down the barrier between you and the subject and gain that trust? On a story like this, it was a little easier because of the fact that they were going through such hard times, and they really wanted people to know. A lot of the farmers that we talked with are multi-generational, going way back. And so some of them were very suspicious. Certainly the Latino community can be very suspicious of any figure that comes that has some kind of authority to it, because they've been through horrible things back in their home countries, or they're they're just wary of that. But in this case, it was made a little easier. We had entree via some people who were helping out the community, which is also very important. When you go in with someone that the community already trusts, you're sort of being vouched for, and it makes it easier. But in places where we didn't enjoy that luxury, we were able to gain their trust, because they knew we were talking about something that was their everyday. I mean, this young girl is bathing in this plastic drum, because they hadn't had running water for months. And so we just encountered all these families, and people were really, really great, and they really wanted their stories told. And so it did make it easier than, say, just street photography or something where you're just coming up to somebody and they have no idea who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. And that trust component can be a little bit harder to negotiate. I did get permission from some of the bigger farmers. They did allow me to go on the land, especially the almond farmers. You'll want to know that to grow one almond, just a single nut, it's a gallon of water per almond. And it's a water intensive crop, and it's everywhere in the western parts of the valley because it is so lucrative. But it drains the water table severely, and a lot of farmers, small farmers, can't keep up, and the larger farms that are growing almonds need more and more water, so they're tapping deeper into the water table. This is a classic scene in Huron. It's a small little diner. It was really, I'd been going to the Central Valley since I was a kid. My father would do road trips up there to do seminars and things, so I was really familiar with Merced, Modesto, all these places, and it just hasn't really changed much. And it's such a, it's in such opposites to what people think of when they think of California. It has none of the, the romance or the exoticism of, palm trees and Hollywood and the Golden Gate Bridge and all these things. It's a completely different world with deep ethnic ties. The Azori community is huge. The Sikh community, it's in Portuguese communities. It's really entrenched there. And of course, the Latino community, which is massive. This is in Terabella. This is a smaller farmer. He wasn't sure if he was going to make it. He was growing pistachios. Pistachio tree needs 7 years to grow before it can even bear fruit, before it can even bear nuts. So he wasn't sure what he was going to do, because the trees were suffering and they hadn't even matured yet. So these are just other scenes. So this was one that I was very happy and excited to work on this story, because it was in my home state of California, and it was a Central Valley, which I've always found very alluring. And then, of course, once you're done doing it all, then you have to edit all the work. And this was a massive body of work, but we had the luxury of being able to edit per story, per installment of the 5 stories. So, so that is the story out of California. And now, when you guys are thinking about telling stories or essays, I mean, there's so many different ways to do it. What I'm showing you here are kind of more classic examples of photo stories. I've done some others where it's been a lot of still life on iPhone. It's been, calling color as a theme through some of it. There's so many different threads that you can put through through your stories. This one that I'm going to show you was one that was a story that I had been trying to get to for a very long time, but was constantly being denied visas. Finally, in 2019, I was working for the Washington Post, and I got a call from my foreign photo editor, or the foreign photo editor, I should say, Chloe Coleman, who is a phenomenal photo editor. And she said, "Hey, do you want to go to Venezuela? They're giving us visas." And I was just like, yes. And for some reason in 2019, they kept giving us visas. And I went on 3 separate trips. One of them, I got to go down for a month. The others were about 3 weeks apiece. So I did get to invest some time to do the stories right. And travel within Venezuela can be difficult. I mean, just getting water for most people in Venezuela can be very difficult, especially at this time. So it was a very volatile time as well. The Venezuelan opposition was growing in strength, and we saw lots of protests spilling out into the streets that weren't seen before, as they were protesting the Maduro government. And so this was a situation where, the news is dictating it. I had done my research already. I knew a lot about Venezuela. Latin America is very close to my heart. And I had been following the story for a long time as best as we could, because many journalists were getting either thrown out or were not being allowed in the first place. So it was kind of like a slow piecemeal supply of information, but we had great local people on the ground. And obviously, as many of us on this call or on this Zoom call already know, without good local people on the ground to help you, we really don't have much. It's really them that make this happen. And so we had good local reporters that I worked with on this, and some great local photographers down there that really, really helped me out in terms of kind of understanding the geography and what could be found where and how difficult it was to get there. So we're looking at a lot of protests, the consequence of protests. I didn't want to just get rocks being flung and things on fire and things like that. It was more important for me to get the consequences, because these protests there's people dying at these protests. And this is an example on the border when they were trying to get humanitarian aid in, and the political football that humanitarian aid became, and just trying to get some different perspectives of defiance. So this is one that is almost like a group of mini stories in how I'm showing it to you here. I went back and I pitched an idea based on my first experience in Venezuela, and that was in February. All those pictures I just showed you took place in February of 2019. In March and May of 2019, I got another visa, and I had thought to myself, okay, I want to go down and do something much more in depth. I want to do how the two of the main pillars of the economy have totally collapsed, tourism and oil, because the oil sector is massive. The tourism sector is dwarfed by the oil sector in terms of GDP in Venezuela, but it was still really important. Angel Falls, the Orinoco River Basin, all these places, and how those two infrastructures were collapsing. So this is an example of the area around Angel Falls, which is also made famous in the movie Up. I'm getting my names mixed up here. In Up, where they're trying to get to the falls, and that was based on Angel Falls. And it's a catastrophe now, an ecological catastrophe, mainly based on gold mining. The police and local governments are getting cash concessions from these mining operations, so they allow it to happen without any oversight. So these are some people that are coming in. Many of them from Brazil. We're down near the Brazilian border here in southern Bolivar state. It takes a really long time to get down there. From Caracas, you have to fly to Ciudad Bolivar, and then from Ciudad Bolivar, it's like about an 8-hour, 9-hour drive due to checkpoints and things. On the way down, local people are working on the road, fixing the road, so you can maybe pay them some currency, local currency, which has the value of confetti. It's almost just completely worthless. Working with Mariana Zuniga, who is a great local reporter down there, and you might hear her on Radio Ambulante. She's a regular on that podcast. We traveled all over the country together, and mainly Caracas, Bolivar State, and then Maracaibo, which I'll show you later. This is in Caracas. So this was kind of, the story wasn't so much in Caracas, but you're going to be there because it's such a unique island in the rest of Venezuela. Caracas, they still enjoy a lot of luxuries. Their trash being picked up, running water in many of the neighborhoods that are just non-existent elsewhere in the country. So this was one where it was really great to have an editor to work with, where I could communicate with Chloe and talk to her about what I was seeing, what the appetite was for daily stories, because not only am I doing my thing for what was the Outlook section, our op-ed section, which ran a 16-page spread and a huge presentation online based on this work, but it was also, there's Maduro, the man responsible for a lot of what you're seeing, but it was also the daily paper, because there were stories that we were working on at the same time that could, that readers wanted to know about right now. So it was great to have someone who was really good at kind of helping me balance those two stories. So now we're going to Lake Maracaibo, which is the oldest lake in South America and the largest. It's a massive body of water on the north coast of Venezuela. And it was the center of the petroleum sector. And Venezuela, a member of OPEC, was a powerhouse. Maracaibo, the entire city was built on oil money. You used to be able to fly nonstop from Maracaibo to dozens of capitals in Europe and the Middle East. That is no longer the case, and it is an ecological disaster. As we're talking right now, millions of gallons of oil are going unfettered out of broken pipes and failed infrastructure. Maria here has lived there her whole life, and she was completely crestfallen about how bad things had gotten along the coast. You can see there along the shoreline, just this permanent stain of oil. The water is filled with it, yet the fishermen still go out and fish. They still catch it. They're still eating it. In the opening picture, the fisherman that was coming out of the water, I had asked him, you know, how was the fishing today? Were you able to catch anything? And he said, solo petróleo, only gasoline, only petroleum. There was nothing else out there. So Maracaibo is a city very rich in traditions, Venezuelan traditions. It is a hot, sweltering, sensual city, really, and it has completely collapsed. In 2019, it was devastated. This is a community. These apartments were never finished. It was a promised wonderland for workers under the Chávez regime. I know this is a hard picture to look at, but it was important that I made this, and we didn't run this particular frame, but we did run one in the post because this young lady here, 14 years old, her child died at childbirth, the baby, they had no money. They went to 4 different hospitals when her water broke. None of them could let her in because they simply didn't have facilities, beds available, because the hospitals were in such bad shape that when the baby died, which is it should not have, because the baby, she could have easily survived even this problematic delivery if the hospital had been at full capacity or full strength. They fashioned a coffin out of a dresser drawer, decorated it with the Hello Kitty stickers, and then paid these grave diggers in cash, whatever they had, to bury the child. And it was truly heartbreaking. I mean, it was one of those things that you just couldn't believe you were seeing it happen. It was really hard to photograph, but for me and for Mariana, we decided that this was way too important to show people just how bad things had gotten. All the things that we take for granted were gone. And these are things that Venezuela used to take for granted. This was the economic envy of the rest of Latin America. This country was a powerhouse all through the 90s into the early 2000s. So talking a little bit here more about the process. So this is obviously a lot of different style pictures. When we edited the piece, we edited Maracaibo and Bolivar State. The Caracas work appeared in separate stories, daily stories. So it was easier to kind of divide it up into those two to do the spread in the Outlook section. Sequencing is crucial. That's where the story really comes alive. You can have a wonderful set of photographs, but if you don't know what to do with them and you don't know how to edit them properly and have one play off the other and complement the other and take the reader through the story, then journalistically it might not reach the heights that you were hoping it would. And so it was really important for us when we edited. I made tiny, prints, 4x6 prints. We spread them out. How is the sequencing going to work? If we have a double truck, which pictures are going to be, really big and have impact, and then what are the other ones that are going to play? We were able to do a double truck with 4 to 6 photographs that would be specifically from Bolivar. Other ones ran huge 12 columns across in newspaper parlance. But it was a really satisfying work because so many people did not know what was going on in Venezuela, and it was so great to be able to put this body of work together to show them. The last set of photographs I'm going to show you is something much more current and urgent, as it were. I went to Ukraine twice last year, and this is a much shorter set of pictures because it was it was that story. It was Ukraine, and I wanted to show this because this is a much tighter edit. This is one that was not done as a story where I'm thinking, oh, it's something we're going to publish in increments or something we're going to publish later on. This was a set of photographs that were sent out almost on a daily basis for the news cycle. So it felt very different than what you're seeing. But at the same time, you still go into it with that story mentality, even on daily assignments I get. I mean, if it's a press conference, maybe not, or a ribbon cutting, heaven forbid you have to go do one of those. But on some of my assignments where, you can play with it a little bit more, I want to approach those as stories. And twofold. One, I don't miss something, I'm kind of covering every aspect. I'm getting back, giving the reader a sense of where we are. Who are the people? It's got to be more than about the place, right? Who are the people? Who are the characters? But also for designers online, for designers in print, they appreciate that, and it can really make the work sing when you're laying that out for an online presentation. When they customize a template, they want to make sure that it's not the same distance, unless you're doing, it's a portrait series or a set of still lifes or something that would really work to that effect. But in this type of storytelling I like to do, I like to bring the readers in and out of the story and meet the people. So this, I'm sure you've seen, a lot of better work than mine out of Ukraine. There are so many people who did great work. Ron, had tremendous work and tons of time invested. Yevgeny's work out of Mariupol was just, the bravest photography I think I've seen in I don't know how long. But what I did here is, this is kind of more of a comprehensive look, rather than looking at one unit, one city. This was kind of looking at the overall picture. The opening picture, I'll just go back real fast, is Odessa under attack. This was the first time that the Russians had bombed Odessa. This is on the front line before the war started. This is in February. It was freezing, but we embedded with this group. They were good enough to have us up there in the trenches right before the war started. The loss is obviously a huge part of it. We were being shelled at this time. This was in a frontline position. This was about 3 days before the war started. But the separatists, they would get drunk and then start lobbing shells over the Russian-backed separatists. And then we went to towns that had been occupied by the Russians, and then they fled, and we talked with people who had been, at their mercy. So I really kind of wanted this to be more of a comprehensive look. This is actually a house that they turned into a mess hall for soldiers. Borscht, had some good borscht there. And, this is downtime. She's getting a tattoo of a Valkyrie on her arm. I know I heard from my colleagues I worked with there that all the people in this group are still alive, that they're still hanging in there. So that's really good news, because they were very, very good to us. And that front line was very much like World War I, the feel of it. So I really wanted to kind of capture that, the rawness of it. And, was I successful? I don't know. I'll leave that to you to decide. Sometimes I think it could have been something a little bit more powerful than that. Whoops, excuse me, hold on. And then again, the price of the war. We all know that the numbers are really high in terms of those that are losing their lives during this prolonged agony for Ukraine. This was in a hospital, so okay, I needed to touch on the hospitals, right? This hospital was being shelled by the Russians with cluster munitions, so they brought everybody down to the basement, and that became the hospital ward. And this is one of the villages that the Russians sent parachute bombs, and they're just bombs floating in on parachutes, and they land wherever. And unfortunately for this family, it landed on their house. Fortunately, none of them were killed in that. And then in Lviv, a huge portion of the population, you've probably seen the Lviv dateline a lot, have moved to Lviv as to get away from the frontline areas, and they are getting food handouts and such. And these are some people who are evacuating Odessa, because now that, I'm sorry, Mykolaiv, trying to get to Odessa because Mykolaiv was coming under increased attack. So those are the 3 sets of photos. Let me go back to our screen here. So yeah, anyway, I would love to address questions or talk, Ron, if you want to talk about some things about storytelling. I mean, there's so many things to cover on the topic, from the inception, coming up with the idea, to researching it. I mean, really researching it. You don't want to just go somewhere because, oh, I've always wanted to go there, or oh, I want to be a war photographer. You got to have better reasons than that. And then pitching the story ideas, coming up with a good pitch. The Venezuela pitch that I did, I had to sit down with the editor of the Outlook section and explain to him why it was important that he dedicate precious real estate in the section and online to get a designer. I mean, it's a big ask, right? You're asking for a lot of investment. Why it was worth it for the Washington Post to invest all this money and time to do this. And Venezuela kind of sold itself because it was a hard place to get into. But at the same time, for that big a spread, I really had to do the right song and dance for that.
Michael, thank you. It's just a glimpse, a little bit of all of your work. It was really lovely to see the edit of those 3 stories. And while people are thinking about some questions, let's just kind of follow up more on what you just spoke about, which is the pitch, right? You're pitching in a specific environment to a client that you already have, but yet you still need to convince them, and you kind of generalize it a little bit with a riff of song and dance, but the song and dance is the key. So
right.
Can you delve a little bit more into detail about how you understood what you needed to show to get the assignment and the space and so on, but what in actuality, what were you talking about, what are the key things that you're convincing them, because you're also not convincing the photo editor, you're convincing a text editor, right, which is a different gambit to some degree. No,
right. On Venezuela, it was convincing word side editor that it was crucial for me to go down and do the story and why it mattered. And so they're really looking at the journalistic hook, right? They want to know, why are my readers going to care? What more are you going to show us than photographs? What is indeed the deeper story here? Yes, I have a captive audience, as it were, at the Washington Post, but when I write up my proposals, it's though I'm pitching to, it could be anybody, it could be any entity, any other editorial client, because each desk is different. Am I pitching to national? Am I pitching to the political desk? Am I pitching to the op-ed section? But for the word side, I really sat down with Chloe and Mariana, who was going to be doing the writing, to talk about, okay, how can we really flesh this out? Are we going to talk about the historical context and weave that in as well? And if so, visually, how are we going to do that? Are we really just going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of the ecological ramifications of it, as well as economic? Yeah, so it's it's really paring it down. And we wanted to talk about that. So we had a solid pitch at the beginning. You don't want to go into a pitch questioning yourself as to, oh, well, I don't know if this is the priority of the story or if that is. You want to know your client. So in the op-ed section, we knew that historical context was going to be very important for the pitch, because that's what the section does. If I had been pitching to the foreign section, that might not have been part of it as much. It might have been more the here and now, consequences now, political ramifications down the road. But yeah, it is like I pitched a story this year to go do a climate change project that's fairly ambitious, and it's going to cost some money. And that's really what I'm thinking about, is that, okay, do they want to invest $8,000 in me to go do a story? Because oftentimes with fixers, airfare and everything, the price tags get very high on a lot of these stories. News gathering is expensive. So I'm just got to convince them that the readers will love it.
So in kind of following up in the same vein, I think especially it's a story that you didn't show, which was the story that you did on conflict, minerals, lithium, and so on. Where do you bring in the idea of impact, of forcing change, of using the name of the Washington Post plus the work to actually change policy? And what can you talk a little bit about because I know you've done a number of stories that have actually had amazing results. And can you kind of talk a little bit about that and how that's kind of both been daunting, but I think also inspiring for you to continue doing work like that, because it's not an easy thing to change
right
policy and so on.
It's really not, and you know well, because so many of your photographs have been hugely influential in so many ways, and it isn't, and that's kind of the payoff, right? That's when all the hard work is done. We got a lot of readers pouring in support for that young family in Venezuela that lost their child, for the malnourished man that was in the bed that you saw. How can I help? What can I do? We got them new mattresses and through a local contact, and that's the best part of it. The California drought, also a lot of the stories we did put a spotlight on these places. National aid started going in, government started paying more attention, both on the state and federal level. And so that is indeed the payoff. And to get people engaged, and that is the power of the post. I mean, the paper drops on the doorstep, and the online version appears on the laptops of people who can actually make a difference, who can actually influence it, whether they are in politics or foundations or what have you. We did one about the batteries, the supply chain for the batteries in our phones, electric vehicles, lithium batteries. And the supply chain is brutal. We're talking about child labor, horrible wages, indentured servitude, very dangerous working conditions, all for our devices that won't work without them. And that took us to graphite mines in China, cobalt mines in Congo, and lithium in Argentina. And the best part of that story, yeah, going to all these places was amazing. Making the pictures there was great. But the best part of the story is when I sat down with the reporter and we called the heads of Apple, Samsung, Tesla, all these companies to tell them, like, hey, guess what? We've seen your supply chain and this is what it looks like. And we have video and photographs of it, and we're about to run a huge story about it. And a couple of them really freaked out, and that was very satisfying. They formed a committee to look over the supply chain. How effective it was in the long run, that's kind of hard to discern. I know that Apple got very serious about it. Samsung had no comment. Tesla had no comment, but others were getting onto this board and things. So that's really, the thought you brought up is really great too, because then it's much bigger than us. We go out there and make the photographs and deliver the story to the readers, and people who see them. And this isn't about me. It's my style, my approach, the way I see it. And I want the work to be strong and powerful. But at the end of the day, our chief responsibility lies with all those people in our photographs and telling their story, and hopefully getting something done about it. Otherwise, if I couldn't get anything done for these people, I don't think I'd be in this business. There's other things I could do.
Can you kind of follow up on a story that you thought was going to have impact and basically just kind of like disappeared, like just became fish wrappings and swiped away, and nobody did anything? I mean, is there something, and what did you do about that, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, it happens quite often. I mean, a lot of stories, sadly, about gun violence, especially within the city, because people are so desensitized to it. Unless you're really all in and you do something like what Barbara Davidson did when she was at the LA Times, about people wounded in the crossfire and shootings that, got tons of great play and was a Pulitzer Prize winner. It can be demoralizing that you think it could do more, but you just got to keep going, because you're doing work for the people who are in the photographs as well, and you are telling their story, and oftentimes they're not sure what the audience is out there, but their story has been told, and responsibly, you hope, and done right. If they're very unhappy and don't think it's been told responsibly, that can actually hurt even more than it not reaching quite the audience you were hoping for.
I mean, actually, could you go a little bit more into that? Because I think that's really interesting, given that now everybody, whether you're with the Maasai or even some untouched tribe in Amazon to some degree, understands the power of the image. And when you're dealing with people that are wanting help and intervention and so on, how do you deal with that responsibility? Because people automatically think like you're a foreigner, you can help because you're not from that community and you're pointing a camera at them. How do you psychologically deal with that with your storytelling?
It's Yeah, it's not easy because often you show up and people are in dire need and they're kind of thinking, oh, like, is there something you can do for me right now? Is there something you can do now? And can you give me this? Can you give me that? Or can you get the word to this person or that particular person? Or and then oftentimes you're always upfront with them, and I just say, look, I'm a photographer. I work with the Washington Post. Here's what I plan on doing with the photos. Here's how they will get run. And it can be frustrating too, because then you take the pictures, you work on the story, and then oftentimes it's out of your hands. And while you have this deep connection to the people you've just been with for it could be as little as 3 hours to 3 months. The people that you're taking the story back to that you hope are going to run it really well, they don't have that same connection. So you're kind of at the mercy of, what if the story doesn't appear for 6 months? What do you tell these people? And, you just try to be upfront, and then they can decide whether, oh, well, that's not doing anything for me. And I've had people just tell me to piss off, right? They're just like, well, we're not interested, please go away, don't bother us. And I'll plead my case as best I can. But then there's others that understand, and they're just like, yeah, go ahead and do what you need to do, and hopefully we can see something from it. But it is tough because you can't overpromise. You can't say, oh, this could get done, or that's going to get done. It's all, we're hoping people will do something. It will drive people to action. And it is difficult. And oftentimes I think to myself, you know, I mean, I love journalism, but it's a lot of it's changing. The idea of objectivity is changing, and advocacy is more important. And I love the fact that so many great photographers and journalists have gone into advocacy, and oftentimes I think, like, it would be great just to go and do that for the causes that I believe in. It's a tough balancing act.
Well, just before I get to one of the questions, where do you draw the line between advocacy journalism and the journalism that you're doing? What's the difference?
I think the difference is humanity, right? It's real, like, human rights. I mean, if I'm going to, let's say, a neo-Nazi rally, I can't be objective. Like, people who are against the neo-Nazi rally and the counter protesters or what have you, it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to make my pictures of them, but I'm not going to be like, oh, well, then the neo-Nazis have a right and all this. It's just really hard for me to do that. And I think in newsrooms across the world, that conversation is happening about that idea of objectivity, about, we live in a very different world now, and about what can be deemed acceptable. I mean, I'm not going to go do something font, over about the Proud Boys that is kind of, oh, they're really just a group of guys that are just like no, they're not. It's far worse than that. So, it's a very, very delicate act, like tightrope to walk, for sure. But in some instances, it really isn't. But I have to be cognizant to stay within the parameters of what the Washington Post, what they feel, because I represent the Washington Post. When I'm out there, I'm not representing myself. I am representing them and what they are doing and how they are covering news. But I think it really is changing. And I think I kind of can sneak in the advocacy in that I go for stories that I believe in. I pitch for story ideas that are important. Like climate change, for example. I mean, we're losing it. We're failing badly. And so to go and do stories to encourage, to balance it out, right? To show people working on solutions. And then, of course, the consequences of not doing anything is important. And so for me, that's kind of my advocacy, but I can do that effectively in the context of still working at an institution like the Washington Post.
That's great. Thank you. We have a question from Lucian Coletti. The question is, great work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
How do you choose what characters to follow deeper in their story? And how do you choose which individual stories will be published?
Well, I don't choose the stories to be published. I wish I sometimes had that power, but that's in the hands of the editors, both on the visual and word sides. But as far as characters, it really kind of varies, right? So if I'm at a protest assignment, it's a news assignment. It's not really a storytelling gig, but it's an assignment. Hey, huge amount of protesters out in front of the Capitol, blah, 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 blah. We need you to get down there. I will go to the protest, and then I will take a look at the people at the protest. The ones that really aren't saying anything, kind of have their hands in their pocket, they're just hanging out. I'm not necessarily going to follow them around because visually it's not telling the story, right? Unless everybody's doing that and it's a protest that's failing. But if there's a lot of passion, then I'm going to dig deep on the people and the faces and the that really get the visceral nature of what it is I'm covering and what they really feel. So that's kind of like character casting. Now, when I'm working with a reporter, for instance, with Diana on the drought story, that can be tough, right? Because for a lot of reporters, there could be a fascinating character, but visually they're not doing anything. They're just kind of sitting there, but they have a great backstory. And writers can weave beautiful tapestries, narrative tapestries out of backstories. For us, we're dead in the water. That's not working for us. So I have to find the balance with them. But with Diana, we would talk about it, but find the characters that are really hurting and then invest the time. And obviously, it's the people that are going to allow you in, that are on board, because that way you can make better pictures. But looking for those great faces, faces with some history, stories. That's kind of how I cast the characters, and who the readers can really feel for, like where the empathy, what can drive the empathy.
One of the things I think that photographers, when they're fortunate enough to be on assignment with a writer, often cannot figure out like how to balance the photographic energy with the writing energy, the scheduling of time, the fact that we have to sometimes get up at 5 a.m., the writers have to get up until 10. Like, how do you coordinate with the writer to make sure, obviously, because you're a team, right? You're telling a story together, but you have different mission statements as well. How does that work
Correct.
for you?
Yeah, for those of you out there that are, that you work closely with a correspondent or multiple correspondents, I mean, oftentimes you'll find correspondents that you just have really good rapport with. And there are correspondents that kind of understand what your needs are and how they're different, because the means to the end is completely different. Our method of gathering news is the complete opposite of what the reporter's doing. They want to sit down and talk for long periods of time. That makes me crazy. I need to be out and moving and have the subjects be moving around and doing their thing. So, if you have good chemistry, much like you would with an editor, when you get great chemistry with a photo editor, you want to maintain it and stay with that photo editor, because that's hard to find. With reporters, I think it's a little easier. It's like there's more out there. But it's just coming to that understanding of like, hey, when you sit down to talk to this subject for the next hour and a half, I'm not going to be in the room. I'm going to wait until they do this or that. And yeah, you're on two different schedules, but as long as they know and that you're working towards the same end. And the hard part too is the whole, oh, this is my photographer and they're going to be doing this and that, and that you got to nip that in the bud. You have to put an end to that right away from the beginning. And that we're both journalists. You do it with words, I do it with images, and we both have a job to do to the best of our ability, and it's going to be at different times sometimes, and working separate. Sometimes safety wise it doesn't work that way, and you both just kind of have to compromise. But for the most part, just knowing that the means is different and making sure the reporter understands that.
And kind of dropping back to kind of the beginning aspects of the research, do you have are there go-to places that you'll go for what's for an actual idea, or to really like place that you trust that can give you enough information to help you kind of formulate your pitch?
I just go to the 7 photo site and rip off all those stories. I find that to be the most effective.
You've done that really well. Yeah, it's very impressive. I wasn't going to mention it. Thank you.
I built my career on it. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the story. For example, when I'm looking at stories in Latin America, I'll often go to local sources for news, news outlets, and listen to because now it's so easy, right? With the internet, I can listen to RPP, like, news radio from Peru or wherever, and get a lot of information that way, and who the players are. And then talking to local people on the ground in certain places. I mean, if you don't know anybody, that obviously becomes more difficult. I am fortunate that at the Washington Post, we have a global network of correspondents, and people that I can tap into and talk about that. But yeah, just doing searches, and also they can be really painful to get through and dry as a bone. But in academia, you can find all these great academic papers that people post online. Oftentimes you can just read the abstract and get a lot out of it, but they post these papers online and you can really learn a lot. It's just, unfortunately, some of the reading is, it'll put you to sleep, but there's really great information in there. So sometimes I'll go there, especially if it's something climate change related, has a science angle. I just got back from Baja California, where we were working on a story for the health and science section. So there it was really great to kind of look at some of the papers that people have written about this particular ailment. So it was, that was very, very helpful. And having a lot of experience in Baja helped a lot too.
And then you briefly mentioned it earlier, but I think it's always important to kind of go back to this, the support network that you have in the field. I think we're probably much changing the title from a fixer to an actual producer. But these people, these men and women, are pretty key, right? To the success of access, understanding, especially if you're going to a place that you haven't been before. Obviously, you have
Essential.
the network, but how do you? It's not so much how do you find them, but how do you find that you can trust them, that they're not trying to use their own agenda, using you for their own agenda, and there's another relationship that you have to manage at the same time with the subjects, with the writers, with your editors back in DC. Just a little bit about that would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for sure. Kind of that whole mystique of the lone photographer working in the field is, it's just a mirage, really, because like you said, I mean, oftentimes I'll work without the correspondence. We'll go at different times, what have you. But yeah, if I'm in a place I don't speak the language, I've done my research and understand who the players are in the country, maybe politically, maybe if it's a conflict, who's on, who's fighting for whom, who is going to be open to having journalists who would, you definitely don't want to run into at a checkpoint, all those kinds of things. But yeah, you're really reliant on locals, and it can vary. I worked with a wonderful woman, Christina, in Slovakia many years ago on a story about the Roma, and she was an advocate for Roma rights, and I could tell when we were working together, and she was essential to get me into Roma communities, that she wanted to kind of steer the coverage to be very, it's the point where people are going to want to give and help our organization out and things like that. And I had to remind her that, well, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here just to document them as they enter the European Union. They were becoming the largest minority all at once in the European Union when Slovakia, Romania, and I think it was Hungary were all entering the EU. So yeah, you have to be cognizant of that. And be very straightforward. You can't BS anybody. You got to be really straightforward with everyone about that, and make sure that you're not being manipulated. And I mean, it can be difficult because the promise of access might evaporate if you don't kind of play ball with what they want done, and then that's a question you have to answer as to whether it's really worth it to capture something that may not be 100% honest. But I have to be honest, the majority of producers / fixers / translators that I've worked with in the field have just been amazing. And it's great and you maintain relationships with them years on, and especially if they're in precarious areas, you want to look out for them and make sure that the work that you did isn't going to get them in trouble. And this is a conversation that we've had many times before. You leave, they stay, that kind of thing. So responsibility is a huge factor in that. But they are essential. That's the bottom line. They are absolutely crucial, and treat them well and pay them right. I know people try to nickel and dime a lot of the producers, the local producers, but they should be paid a very good wage for what they do, because they are journalists as well.
That's really helpful, Michael. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your work and your ideas on behalf
Absolutely.
of the 17 Photo Wings. It's been a great pleasure